The Titanic 2, Antarctica. Wake up, Amy. The voice invaded her dreams. Go away, I'm sick. No, you're not. It was Ian. We're in Antarctica waters. The ship isn't lurching about like Ham attempting to dance. Hey, dude, I heard that. Amy opened her eyes. The curtains were open. An iceberg sailed by. Or was it a mirage? No, she corrected. They had sailed by an iceberg. Ian smiled. Welcome to Antarctica. Amy stumbled to the window. She could see the horizon instead of a wall of water. Outside, a silvery blue sky arced over a deep blue sea. Icebergs dotted the seascape, one as tall as a building, and others scored with undulations created by wind and waves. One was a shimmering portal, an arch through which Amy saw her first penguin as it slid across an icy floe and splashed into the sea. Inside the ice were hidden colors, shades of blue she hadn't known existed, electric, aquamarine, the palest powdery blue, the sheerest green. A huge bird flew by, its white wings beating rhythmically. Its wingspan must have been close to 10 feet. Albatross, Ian said. Magic, she said. They were silent a moment, all of them lined up at the window. On the other side was a world of astonishing beauty, so strange and new that it seemed unreal. How lucky we are to see this, Amy thought, remembering all that Dan had said about how endangered the environment was. Hard on the heels of that was, we must save this ship. Ian rubbed his hands together. Yes, now that we've fully appreciated the beauties of this amazing continent, let's get going. He was interrupted by the chime of a text. Ian checked his phone. It's from the Outcast. Having a blast? It's now day 5. Let's speed up the timeline. Set your clocks for 6 p.m. exactly. That's when things go boom. Ian put down his phone, his face grim. It's 4 o'clock now. That only gives us 2 hours. Just then, Dan barreled through the door, followed by a shy-looking man with glasses. Hey everyone, meet Dr. Jeff. He's going to solve all our problems. Well, I don't know about that. The man shrugged in a modest way. But I'll do anything to help out Grace's grandchildren. Way to stay undercover, Ian said, with an annoyed glance at Dan. No worries. I'm an ECAT, Dr. Tagemeyer said cheerfully. I wouldn't have blown Dan's cover, but he almost got caught by the purser. I've been in South Pole Station for a year, totally out of the Cahill loop. So, I don't know what you're doing here, but I want to help. My assistant got sick in Ushuaia, so one of you can be Rollo Hardcastle. And if anyone stops you, just tell them you're working with me. Cahills have to stick together. That's a concept that seems to have been mislaid lately, Ian murmured. But he stood and shook Dr. Jeff's hand. Welcome to the family, he said. We can use the help. The gang split up. The better to fully explore the ship. Dr. Jeff had gone off to ask Peter Zimmer for a tour of the engine room. Ian felt the ticking of the clock with every beat of his heart. What was that American expression that Hamilton always used? Crunch time. Now that he had a cover story, he felt a bit safer on the ship. He would blend in. He'd donned a hideous fleece garment in order to pass as a student. Once they prevented the disaster and got off the ship, he would contemplate the American love of fleece and toss this one in the garbage. Ian opened the door to the outside. A blast of wind almost knocked him down, and the cold hit him so hard his teeth hurt. Tears sprang to his eyes and ran down his face. Every exposed piece of skin was painful. Ian clapped his hands over his ears and bent over to protect himself from the agony. Suddenly he loved fleece. The door slammed behind him. He took a breath and felt his lungs expand. It was the sharpest, cleanest air he'd ever breathed. Iceberg formations loomed on either side of the ship, incredibly beautiful ledges and towers some hundreds of feet high. An island sat in the distance with snowy cliffs and black sand beaches. People were lined up, hanging on to the railings in the middle of the gusts, with binoculars pointed at the moving black dots on the beach. Ian realized that they were penguins. He stood for a moment, trying to trace their comical movements. When he turned and looked out to sea, a whale casually breached, its tail a lazy flourish as it sank back into the sea. Ian wasn't much for nature. He much preferred a busy London street, but this was beyond spectacular. Magic, Amy had said, and she was right. He hurried along the deck to the bridge. When he pushed open the door, he was glad to see a crowd of science nerd students crowded around the instruments they'd help with camouflage. Passengers were welcome on the bridge, and Ian stopped for a moment, pretending to study the rows of electronic instruments. At the other end of the bridge, he saw some officers conferring. They were frowning and speaking in low voices. Ian skirted the map table and, pretending to admire a breaching whale, edged closer to see if he could overhear. "Captain wants to keep on to Paradise Harbor," one of the officers said. "Too windy for landings on Deception Island, and there's snow coming. The passengers have had enough of rough seas. We can hit it on the way back, if we have time. So we'll just do the staff transfer then? Second Mate Anderson will ferry Dr. Tuggemeyer to Deception Island Station. Why is he leaving early? Can't wait to get back to civilization, huh? Well, he didn't last very well on the winter expedition, did he? Heard they had to airlift him out last April. Sick? No, just spooked. Too much dark, too much ice. Man, is he in the wrong profession. They chuckled, and Ian moved away, his ears buzzing with what he'd heard. Last April? That was almost a year ago. That meant Dr. Jeff had lied to them. He'd only lasted a month at South Pole. Maybe Dr. Jeff had been embarrassed to admit he had to be airlifted out. But somehow Ian didn't think so. It meant that he'd been around for much of last year, plenty of time to be recruited by the outcast. And he was leaving the ship Shortly before it was scheduled to explode, Ian texted the others. Jeff Toggemeyer being escorted off ship to Deception Island. Very suspicious. Lied about spending winter at Pole. I'll get Kara to investigate. Meanwhile, locate him. Could be in Zimmer's cabin. He slipped the phone back in his pocket and headed off the bridge. The blast of wind made him stagger. In front of him was a crew member, and Ian slowed his pace, not wanting to attract attention. He buried his chin in his fleece. It was too cold to walk slowly. Ian risked a quicker pace, coming up behind the crew member, who opened a door to the main passageway and passed through. Ian followed, glad to feel the warmth of the ship. The crew member headed for the stairway, whistling a tune. Whistling. Bad luck. No crew member would whistle aboard a ship. Ian studied the man's stride, the way he moved, keeping his chin slightly angled and away from the passengers as they walked by. Something about him was familiar, very familiar. Nellie had filled him in on Fisk's identification of the mystery guy. It was Alec Spassky.